She died on the delivery table, 27 years old. 2 babies pulled from her body. 1 boy, 1 girl, both breathing, both screaming. Their mother wasn't. Her husband stood in the hallway. He wasn't praying. He was texting his mistress. 4 days later, the girlfriend changed the sheets on the dead woman's bed. Only 4 days later, she moved into the house. She posted the dead woman's baby shoes on social media with a caption that read, "Sometimes life gives you a second chance at family." She thought she'd won. But the dead woman was smarter than all of them. Hidden within the lining of her personal property bag, stitched into the fabric of her worn coat, was a sealed envelope, a USB drive, and a letter that began with 6 words. If anyone is reading this now, and when the court-ordered DNA test came back, it didn't just destroy the husband. It revealed a secret so shocking that the mistress, the mother-in-law, the lawyers, and every single person in that courtroom realized they'd underestimated a dead woman. This is the story of a mother who planned her final battle before she ever closed her eyes. Stay until the end, because nothing in this story is what it seems. If this moves you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Now let's go back to that delivery room, the moment everything changed. 9:47 at night. Delivery room number 3 at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Fluorescent lights poured down onto the wax-pale face of Celeste Morrow. Dr. Nina Harlow had delivered more than 2,000 babies in her career. She'd never lost a mother. Not once. And she had no intention of letting tonight be the first time. But the blood, there was too much blood. It kept coming, soaking the sheet, dripping to the floor, and gathering into a pool of dark red. Placental abruption. Those 2 words rang inside Dr. Harlow's mind like a funeral bell. She was only 27. The pregnancy was only 8 months along. Her body was too fragile, too thin, too exhausted to endure anything else. The monitor screamed. Beep, beep, beep. Non-stop, shrill, frantic. The heart rate was dropping. The blood pressure was crashing. Every number on the screen was plunging into an abyss. "We're losing her," Dr. Harlow shouted. "Crash cart. Right now." Nurses ran. Instruments clattered against each other. Someone yelled for the anesthesiologist. Someone else pressed gauze into the wound that kept spilling blood. But in the middle of all that chaos, Celeste Morrow opened her eyes. Only for a moment. Her gray-green eyes searched, rummaged, until they landed on Dr. Harlow's face. Her lips moved. Dr. Harlow bent down, put her ear close to her mouth. Celeste's voice was only a breath, thin as a strand of silk, weak as a butterfly wing beating in a storm. "My children," Dr. Harlow gripped her hand. "We'll save them. You're going to be okay." Celeste shook her head, just slightly, almost impossible to see. "No. Listen to me. My children. Don't give them to him." Dr. Harlow frowned. "Give them to who?" But Celeste didn't answer. Her eyes closed, her fingers went slack, and the monitor drew a flat line. "No." Dr. Harlow started chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She counted in her head, her hands driving down into the narrow chest of the young woman. "Give epinephrine," she shouted. The needle pierced the vein. The medicine flowed in. No response. "Defibrillate." The paddles were set on Celeste's chest. Her body jerked, fell back. The line stayed flat. Dr. Harlow didn't stop. She kept compressing for 5 more minutes. 10 minutes. 11 minutes. Sweat ran down her forehead. Her hands shook. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Meanwhile, on the other side of the delivery room, another team was fighting another battle. An emergency cesarean. 2 babies were pulled from their mother's body in less than 3 minutes. The first was a girl, Rosalie. She cried the instant she hit the air, sharp and furious, as if she were protesting being dragged from the only safety she'd ever known. The second was a boy, Finnegan. His cry came slower, smaller, but it came. Both of them were breathing. Both of them were alive, but their mother wasn't. 11 minutes after resuscitation began, Dr. Harlow stopped. She looked at the clock on the wall. She looked down at the young woman's face on the table. Eyes sealed shut, skin paper white, lips turning gray. She took a deep breath. Her voice trembled when she spoke. Time of death, 9:47 at night. The delivery room sank into silence. No one spoke. No one moved. There was only the machines still beeping. and somewhere far off, the crying of 2 newborns echoing from the NICU. 2 tiny lives had just entered this world. Their mother had just left it. Dr. Harlow peeled off her gloves and tossed them into the medical waste bin. She walked out of the delivery room, leaned her back against the hallway wall, and closed her eyes. Celeste's last words still echoed in her mind. Don't give them to him. She didn't understand what it meant, but she'd remember it. She'd remember it forever. Bradley Whitmore stood at the end of the hallway when Dr. Harlow stepped out looking for him. He didn't rush over. He didn't ask questions. He just stood there with his back against the wall, phone in his hand, his thumb still scrolling across the screen. Dr. Harlow stopped in front of him. She looked into his eyes and said the words she'd had to say far too many times in her life, words she still never got used to. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. Your wife didn't make it. Bradley looked at her. 1 second. 2 seconds. He blinked. Then he asked, Are the babies alive? Dr. Harlow paused for a beat. In more than 20 years in medicine, she'd witnessed every kind of reaction from husbands who'd lost their wives. Some screamed and sobbed. Some collapsed. Some refused to believe it, demanded to see the body, demanded she say it again, demanded a miracle. But she'd never seen anyone ask about the children before asking about the wife who'd just died. Not once. Both babies are doing well, she answered, her voice harder than she meant it to be. They're in the NICU for monitoring because they were born early, but there's nothing to worry about. Bradley nodded. Good, he said. Just one word. Good. Then he turned and walked down the hallway, his phone already pressed to his ear. Dr. Harlow stood there watching him go, her brows drawn tight. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but something was deeply wrong. Out in the corridor, Bradley walked to a shadowed corner beside the vending machine. The fluorescent light above him flickered. He dialed. Waited through 1 ring. 2. Then someone picked up. Yeah, it's me, a woman's voice murmured. Sleepy, a little rough. Paige. Bradley took a breath, then said, It's done. She's gone. Silence on the other end. Then a long exhale. Oh my God. Finally. I'll come right now. No, Bradley said quickly. Not yet. Wait until morning. Better to wait a few days. Let things cool down. You understand. I understand, Paige replied. Her voice was calmer now, more calculated. Have you called your mom? Not yet. I'll call later. Bradley hung up without another word. He slipped the phone into his pocket, adjusted his collar, smoothed his hair into place. Then he headed toward the NICU. The neonatal intensive care unit sat at the far end of the east hallway. Glass doors, soft light inside, a line of incubators arranged in rows. Bradley stopped at the glass. He looked in. 2 incubators sat side by side. The one on the left had a small pink sign that read, Baby Girl Whitmore. The one on the right had a blue sign that read, Baby Boy Whitmore. 2 tiny lives lay inside, eyes sealed shut, chests rising and falling in steady rhythm. Bradley watched them through the glass. He didn't go in. He didn't ask a nurse to let him through. He didn't touch them. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, with his hands in his pockets, face blank, like a man looking at merchandise behind a department store display case. In the corner of the NICU, Nurse Miriam Chen was checking another incubator. She was 58, salt and pepper hair twisted into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, eyes sharp as razors behind silver-framed glasses. She'd worked at this hospital for 30 years. She'd seen every kind of parent. The ones who sobbed the first time they looked at their child. The ones who trembled, afraid to touch the tiny life they'd just brought into the world. The ones who dropped to their knees and prayed right there in the NICU. But she'd never seen a father stand and look at his own babies like that. Cold, calculating, as if he were assessing an investment. Miriam Chen didn't say anything, but she watched. She saw Bradley glance at his watch twice in 3 minutes. She saw him check his phone 4 times. She saw him turn and leave in less than 5 minutes, never once placing a hand on the incubator, never offering a single word to the children who'd just been born. Miriam Chen remembered it all, every detail, every expression, every second. She didn't know why she was doing it. It was instinct, nothing more. The instinct of someone who'd lived long enough to know there were things that looked normal on the outside, but were rotten from within. And the man who'd just walked out of the NICU. The man who'd just lost his wife without shedding a single tear. The man who looked at his children like objects. That man was rotten. Miriam Chen was sure of it. 3 hours after Dr. Harlow pronounced the time of death, Miriam Chen pushed open the door to the morgue prep room. The room sat in the hospital basement, at the end of a long, hollow corridor, washed in pale yellow light, thick with the sharp stench of formaldehyde. She'd volunteered for this assignment, to prepare the body of the young woman for the family to come and claim. No one on shift wanted to do it. Preparing the body of a mother who'd just died in childbirth was the heaviest work in the hospital, but Miriam wanted to do it. She wanted to see her one more time. The woman with gray-green eyes she'd caught a glimpse of when she'd been rushed down the hallway on an emergency gurney 8 months earlier. The woman with bruises on her wrists that Miriam had pretended not to notice. Celeste Morrow lay on a cold steel table, a white sheet pulled up to her chest, her face wax pale beneath the fluorescent light. Miriam stepped to the side of the table and looked down. 27. Too young. Too young to be lying in a place like this. She began the routine, checked the identification band on the wrist. Celeste Morrow, female, 27, time of death, 9:47 at night. Cause, hemorrhage from placental abruption. She pulled out gloves, ready to wash the body. But before she did, she had to do one last check. Habit. 30 years in a hospital had taught her that you always check. Always. Miriam placed 2 fingers against Celeste's neck, just under the angle of the jaw, where the carotid artery ran. She waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Nothing. She was about to pull her hand away when she stopped. Something. So faint, so weak, like a butterfly brushing her fingertips. Miriam stopped breathing. She pressed a little harder, poured every sense she had into those 2 fingers, and she felt it. A pulse. Frail. Slow. Maybe 10 seconds between beats. But it was a pulse. "Oh my God," Miriam whispered. "She's alive." She looked around the room. No one. The door was closed tight. The security camera in the corner had been disabled for years because no one bothered to fix it. She looked back at Celeste. She wasn't dead. She was in a deep coma. Her heart rate so slow it was almost impossible to detect. Her breathing so weak it wouldn't even stir a strand of hair held under her nose. But she was alive. Miriam knew what she should do. She should run out immediately. Call a doctor. Sound an alarm through the entire hospital. Get Celeste up to the emergency room. Save her by the book. But she didn't do it. Instead, she thought of the man in the NICU, the man who stared at his babies through glass without a flicker of emotion. The man who called someone right after he was told his wife was dead and said 2 words, "It's done." Miriam hadn't heard that call. But she'd read his lips. 30 years in a hospital. She'd learned a lot of things. If she told the hospital, they'd save Celeste, and then they'd hand her back to that husband. The man with eyes cold as ice. The man Miriam was 100% sure had caused the bruises on Celeste's wrists 8 months earlier. No, Miriam couldn't do that. She pulled her phone from her pocket. An old phone with buttons, not a smartphone. She scrolled down her contacts and stopped at a name with no last name. Just 1 letter. T. She pressed call. Waited. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then someone picked up. No one spoke. Only silence. But Miriam knew someone was listening. "Mr. Kane," she said, voice low and steady. "I need to report something. The woman you asked me to keep an eye on 8 months ago. She gave birth tonight. They declared her dead." Silence stretched. Then a man's voice, low, cold, sharp as steel, came through the line. They declared. Miriam drew a breath. "Yes," they declared. "But she isn't dead. She's lying right in front of me, and her pulse is still there." Silence again. Longer than before. Miriam could almost hear the gears turning in the mind of the man on the other end. Then the voice came back. "Don't let anyone touch her. I'll be there in 20 minutes." The call ended. Miriam slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked down at Celeste. The young woman still lay there, motionless, lips gray, eyelids barely closed, but her chest was rising and falling, so faint, so slow. But it was rising and falling. "Someone's coming to save you," Miriam whispered. "And this time, I won't let anyone hand you back to that devil again." 19 minutes after the call, a black Maybach glided into the parking lot behind Northwestern Memorial Hospital. No headlights. No roaring engine. Just a dark shape slipping through the night as if it belonged to the shadows. Theron Kane stepped out of the car. Over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, black hair swept back, gray eyes cold as steel beneath the flicker of the streetlights. A faint scar ran from his temple down to the left side of his jaw, a souvenir from a night he never spoke about. He didn't go through the main entrance. He didn't go through the emergency room. He didn't go anywhere with security cameras or guards. Instead, he circled to the back of the building, where a steel door sat tucked between two oversized trash bins. That door led down to the basement, into a system of pipes and service corridors only maintenance staff knew existed. Theron Kane knew. He knew every hidden passage in this city. That was how he survived. That was how he became the ghost. Miriam Chen waited at the end of the basement hallway, under a dim red exit light. She didn't speak when she saw him. She only turned and started walking. Theron followed. They moved through 3 corridors, 2 stairwells, and a keypad-locked door that Miriam entered quickly, as if she'd done it 100 times. Finally, they stopped in front of the morgue prep room. Miriam opened the door and stepped aside. Theron went in, and he saw her. Celeste Morrow lay on the steel table, a white sheet pulled up to her chest. Dark brown hair fanned out on either side of the pillow. Her face was wax pale, her lips gray, her eyelids barely shut, but her chest was rising and falling, so faint, so slow, as if she were sleeping a sleep deeper than any sleep. Theron stood completely still. He stared at her, and the memory from 8 months ago crashed over him like a flood. That night, the parking lot, 2 in the morning. He'd just left the emergency room after checking on one of his men who'd been injured on a job that went the wrong way. He was heading for his car when he heard it. The thud of impact. A muffled moan. A man's guttural snarl. He looked toward the sound. Under the sickly yellow glow of the parking lot light, he saw a man slam a woman into the side of a car. The woman was pale and trembling, her eyes filled with a desperate exhaustion that went deeper than bone. The man punched her in the stomach. 1 blow. 2. The woman folded over, mouth open, no sound coming out. Theron didn't interfere in other people's business. That was a rule. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a cop. He was a mafia boss, and mafia bosses didn't get tangled in petty street messes. But he had another rule. A rule he'd made when he was 8 years old, from the night he watched his father beat his mother to death on the kitchen floor. You never stand by while a woman is broken. Never. Theron stepped forward. The man didn't hear him coming, not until Theron's hand closed around his throat from behind and threw him to the ground. The man looked up, eyes full of terror. He saw gray eyes cold as ice, the scar on the face, the gaze of a killer. He scrambled up, bolted to his own car, started it, and tore off like a ghost was chasing him. Theron didn't follow. He turned back to the woman. She was on the concrete, arms wrapped around her belly, tears streaming down her face. He crouched, lifted her up. She looked at him, gray-green eyes drowning in pain and fear. "Please," she whispered. "Don't tell anyone. Please." Theron didn't answer. He brought her into the hospital through the emergency entrance. He sat beside her bed until the doctor confirmed her internal injuries were stable and she would recover. He meant to leave, but she caught his hand. And he stayed. That night, in the stillness of the hospital room, she told him about 3 years of hell. About a husband who beat her every time he got drunk. About the times she tried to leave and was dragged back. About having no family, no one, nowhere to go. And he told her something he'd never told anyone. About his mother. About the night he was 8, about the sound of bones breaking, the sound of crying, and the silence afterward. They shared each other's darkness, and inside that darkness, they found each other. Just one night. Only one night. The next morning, Theron vanished. No name, no phone number, no promises. He thought it was the last time he'd ever see her. He was wrong. Now, 8 months later, he stood in a morgue prep room, staring at her on a steel table, her heart still beating while the whole world believed she was dead. "Get her out of here," Theron said, his voice flat. "Right now." Miriam nodded. She was already prepared. She called a man named Morris, the night shift mortuary attendant, a man who'd been on Theron Kane's payroll for 5 years. Morris arrived within 10 minutes. He brought forged files, a cremation certificate, a body handling report. Everything was filled out in advance, waiting only for signatures. Celeste Morrow, 27, deceased from postpartum hemorrhage, body cremated at the family's request, ashes scattered according to her wishes. No one would ever find her body, because there would be no body to find. 30 minutes later, an unmarked ambulance rolled out through the hospital's back gate. Inside, Celeste lay on a gurney, a monitor fastened to her chest, an IV line running into her arm, still in a coma, still unmoving, but alive. Theron Kane sat beside her, gray eyes never leaving her face. In the Northwestern Memorial System, Celeste Morrow was recorded as having died at 9:47 at night and being cremated the next morning. She no longer existed. She was gone, like a ghost. The next morning, just as the sun was breaking over the Chicago skyline, Miriam Chen returned to the hospital to finish the last part of what still had to be done. The personal belongings of the dead. By procedure, a deceased patient's property bag had to be inventoried, documented, and handed over to the next of kin. Bradley Whitmore had called at 6 a.m, his voice ice cold, asking when he could come pick up his wife's things, not to keep his mementos. He said it plainly. He needed to check whether there were any insurance papers or a will inside. Miriam listened and felt like she was going to throw up. Celeste's belongings bag sat in the basement storage room, right next to the morgue prep room that was now empty. A white hospital cloth bag, holding the few things she'd brought when she was admitted. A gray wool coat, the collar worn thin, a pair of flats, the soles scuffed down, a small wallet with $23 in cash, an ID card, and a crumpled ultrasound photo. 2 tiny shapes in the picture. 2 beating hearts. Miriam stared at the photo and felt her own heart tighten. That girl had carried her baby's image into the delivery room. She'd wanted to see them, even if it was the last time. Miriam set the photo aside and kept checking. She turned out the coat pockets. Nothing. She checked the wallet. Nothing that stood out. She was about to close the bag when her hand touched something hard at the bottom. She frowned and tipped the cloth bag over. The inner lining had a seam that didn't match the rest, like someone had ripped it open and stitched it back up. Miriam took medical scissors and cut along the seam, and she found it. A white envelope, sealed tight with clear tape, hidden between 2 layers of fabric. She pulled it out and held it in her hand. It was light, but not too light. There was something inside. Miriam looked around the room. No one. The camera had been shut off since last night, and still hadn't been turned back on. She opened the envelope. Inside were 3 things. A small black USB drive, a handwritten letter, folded into thirds, and a typed sheet with a bold heading, "Instructions in case I don't survive." Miriam lifted the letter, her hands starting to tremble. She unfolded it and began to read. The handwriting slanted to the right, a little shaky in places, like the writer had been crying. As Miriam scanned the letter, her eyes widened in disbelief. It was a confession of 3 years of terror, documenting every blow Bradley had struck and every lie he had told. But the most shocking revelation lay at the very end, a truth about the children's paternity that changed everything. Miriam realized that Celeste hadn't just been a victim. She had been a strategist, fighting a silent war for her children's future until her very last breath. Miriam folded the letter back up, her hands shaking. She looked at the USB, the instruction page, the empty envelope in her hand. That girl had known. She'd known she might die. And she'd prepared. She'd prepared everything before she ever climbed onto the delivery table. Not to save herself, to save her children. Miriam slid the envelope into her coat pocket, gathered the rest of Celeste's belongings back into the cloth bag, and arranged them neatly, as if nothing had happened. When Bradley Whitmore came to claim the bag an hour later, he checked it, rummaged through the coat, opened the wallet to count the money, then shrugged and walked away without a single word of thanks. He didn't find anything, because there was nothing left to find. That afternoon, Miriam Chen drove to a mansion in Lake Forest, where a young woman lay in a coma inside a glass-walled room overlooking Lake Michigan. Miriam knocked on Theron Kane's office door, stepped inside, and set the envelope on his desk. "She prepared this," Miriam said. "She knew she might die, and she left everything behind." Theron opened the envelope, read the letter, and plugged the USB into his computer. He didn't say a word for 20 minutes. He only read, and watched, and stayed silent. When he finally looked up, his gray eyes were colder than ever, but there was something else in them, something Miriam had never seen in the eyes of the most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago. Anger. No, not just anger. Rage. That rage was fueled by a memory he had kept locked away the night he chose to break his own rules to save a woman who reminded him of his mother. He knew that Bradley's cruelty was not just a mistake. but a calculated destruction of a human soul, and he would not let it go unpunished. The Lake Forest mansion sat on a hill overlooking Lake Michigan, a 40-minute drive from downtown Chicago. No one knew this place existed. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't in any real estate record. It was one of Theron Kane's 5 safe houses, and it was the safest of them all. Celeste was brought here the night she vanished from the hospital. The room set aside for her was on the 2nd floor, glass walls facing the lake, natural light pouring in from sunrise to sunset. A hospital bed stood in the center of the room, with a heart monitor beside it, a ventilator, an IV pole. A private nurse was on duty 24 hours a day, rotating every 8 hours, each one paid 5 times the normal rate and bound by a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. Celeste lay there, motionless, eyes shut, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator. Deep coma. Theron's private doctor said her body was healing itself. Too much blood loss, too much stress. Her heart had stopped long enough for her brain to begin shutting down non-essential functions. Now it was rebooting. Little by little. It could take days. It could take weeks. It could be never. Theron didn't care about odds. He only cared about outcomes. Every day, he went to that room at least once, sometimes twice. Sometimes he stayed for hours. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He only stood in the corner with his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the pale face on the bed. The nurses had gotten used to his presence. They didn't ask. No one dared ask Theron Kane anything. But Jonah Pierce was different. Jonah had been Theron's right hand for 12 years. A former Navy SEAL, 38 years old, hair cut close, brown eyes sharp as a razor. He'd killed for Theron. He'd nearly died for Theron. He'd buried bodies for Theron. There were no secrets between these 2 men. Except one. On the 5th day after Celeste was brought to the mansion, Jonah stood outside the room and watched Theron through the glass. His boss was standing in that familiar corner, eyes locked on the woman in the bed. Jonah waited until Theron stepped out. Then he asked, "Who is she?" Theron didn't break stride. "It doesn't matter. You've had her watched for 8 months. Jonah followed, his voice still even but harder now. "You've never done that for anyone. Not ever. Not even for your most important deals. But you had Miriam Chen watch an unknown woman for 8 months. And now you've brought her to your safest house. I need to know why." Theron stopped. He turned and looked Jonah straight in the eye, gray eyes cold as ice, not a trace of emotion. "She's carrying my children." Silence. Jonah stood there, face blank, but inside he was processing it. 12 years. 12 years working for Theron Kane. The boss who never had a girlfriend, never spent the night with anyone more than once, never spoke about family or children. And now, suddenly, there was a woman and 2 babies. Jonah nodded once, slow. "I understand," he said, and didn't ask anything else. "What do you need me to do?" "Protect her," Theron answered, 24/7. "No one gets into that room except the nurses, Miriam, and me. If anyone else tries to get close, shoot first and ask questions later." Jonah nodded again and turned toward the stairs. He didn't ask about the husband. He didn't ask about the babies. He didn't ask why Theron had brought home a woman the hospital had declared dead. He didn't need to know. He only needed to follow orders. That afternoon, Miriam Chen arrived at the mansion with her daily report. She sat in Theron's office, a dark room with the curtains drawn, only a pale yellow desk lamp lighting stacks of files. "Bradley Whitmore visits the babies every day," Miriam began, her tone as steady as if she were reading a weather report. "Exactly 9 in the morning, stays 15 minutes, then leaves. He looks at them through the glass. He never goes in. He never asks to hold them. He never asks the nurses about their condition." Theron didn't speak. He just sat there, fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "And the woman, Paige McAllister," Miriam continued. "She moved into Celeste's house on day 4. She replaced all the bed sheets, the curtains, and she started repainting the living room. Yesterday she posted a photo on Instagram, Celeste's baby shoes, with the caption, 'Sometimes life gives you a second chance to have a family.'" The silence stretched. Theron stopped tapping. His hand curled into a fist, the knuckles bleaching white. "Anything else?" "Beatrice Whitmore, Bradley's mother, called a lawyer about Celeste's will," Miriam said. "They're trying to prove Celeste wasn't of sound mind when she wrote it, so they can have it invalidated. and Bradley has filed paperwork to claim the life insurance payout. $300,000. The beneficiary is him. Theron stood up and walked to the window, staring out at Lake Michigan rippling beneath the sunset. When will the babies be discharged? About a week, Miriam answered. They're doing well. No complications. Theron didn't turn around. He stood with his back to Miriam, silent for a long time. Then he spoke, voice low and cold. Keep watching. Report everything to me. Every detail. Every step Bradley Whitmore takes. I want to know what he eats, where he sleeps, who he meets, and what he's thinking. Miriam nodded and rose to leave, but before she reached the door, Theron added one more line. And Miriam. She stopped and turned. When she wakes up, I want to be the first person she sees. Miriam looked at him for a moment, then nodded. I understand, Mr. Kane. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. In the dark room, Theron Kane stood alone, staring at the lake as it sank into darkness. He thought about the woman lying upstairs, trapped in a coma. The woman he'd left without a goodbye 8 months ago. The woman carrying his children when he hadn't even known. The woman who'd prepared everything to protect those babies, even when she thought she was going to die. He didn't know what he was feeling. Anger. Yes. Guilt. Maybe. Fear. Theron Kane didn't fear anything. But the thought that she might never wake up, that thought made something inside him feel dangerously close to fear, and he hated that feeling. Day 23. 7:12 in the morning. The first sunlight had just touched the surface of Lake Michigan, pouring gold into the glass-walled room on the second floor of the Lake Forest mansion. Miriam Chen sat in the chair beside the bed, reading an old book, glancing at the monitor out of habit. Heart rate steady, blood pressure stable, breathing soft and even. Nothing different from the 22 days before. Then Celeste Morrow opened her eyes. No warning. No small movement first. 1 second her lids were closed. The next those gray-green eyes were staring at the ceiling. Confused, terrified, trying to process what was happening. Miriam dropped her book. She shot to her feet, stepped to the bedside, leaned down over Celeste. Can you hear me? Celeste blinked. She turned her head toward Miriam, lips moving as if she were trying to speak, but her throat was too dry. Miriam immediately poured water, guided a straw to her mouth. Celeste drank in small sips, slow, her eyes never leaving the older woman sitting beside her. When the water finally soothed the burning dryness, when her voice could make it out, Celeste asked one question. Only one. Where are my children? Miriam set the cup down. She looked into those gray-green eyes, full of worry and fear, and she knew there was no gentle way to say this. Listen to me first, Miriam began, slow and clear. You've been in a coma for 23 days. Your 2 babies, a boy and a girl, are both healthy. They were discharged 2 weeks ago. Celeste let out a breath, her chest lightening as if a stone had been lifted. But Miriam wasn't finished. There with Bradley and Paige McAllister. Celeste's eyes went wide. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak, her arms shaking, unable to hold her weight. Miriam eased her back down, gentle but firm. You have to stay calm. You just woke up. Your body needs time. No. Celeste shook her head, her voice rough but desperate. You don't understand. Bradley. He will. He can't. My children. I know, Miriam said, taking her hand, her voice dropping lower. I know what Bradley is. I've been watching him. He visited the babies every day at the hospital, but he never held them. Not once. He only stood and looked through the glass and then left, like they were objects, not people. Celeste closed her eyes, tears slipping down her temples, soaking into the pillow. What else? She asked, her voice trembling. Tell me all of it. Everything. Miriam drew a breath. Bradley declared you dead. He collected $300,000 from your life insurance. Paige moved into your house on day 4. They replaced your sheets, repainted the walls, threw away most of your things. They're living in your home, with your children, like you never existed. Silence stretched. Celeste lay there with her eyes shut, tears still falling, but she didn't cry out loud. No sobbing, no screaming, only the heavy quiet of someone who'd suffered too much to have the strength left to make noise. Then she opened her eyes. Those gray-green eyes weren't confused anymore. They weren't afraid. There was only cold focus, concentration, resolve. Who brought me here? Celeste asked. Miriam watched her for a moment, then answered, The man who saved you in the parking lot 8 months ago. Celeste stopped breathing. Her heart began to race. The monitor started beeping faster. Her eyes widened, her lips parted. Him, she whispered. He's real. I thought he was a dream. That night. I thought I imagined him. It wasn't a dream, Miriam said. He's real, and he's been watching you for 8 months. He told me to keep an eye on you at the hospital. He got you out when I found you were still alive. He paid for the doctors, the nurses, everything. He stood in this room for hours every day, waiting for you to wake up. Celeste swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Why? Because you're carrying his children, Miriam answered, blunt, and because he'll never allow a pregnant woman to be beaten without a price. That's his rule. Silence. Celeste stared up at the ceiling, processing it. His children. 2 babies. Rosalie and Finnegan. Not Bradley's. She'd known that for a long time. Ever since she counted the days and realized the conception lined up with that night. The night in the hospital. The night with the nameless man. She'd kept that secret for 8 months. She'd written it into the letter hidden in her belongings bag. She'd prepared for the possibility she wouldn't survive. But she didn't think he would truly appear. She didn't think he would find her. She didn't think he would save her. I want to see him, Celeste said, her voice no longer shaking. Now. Miriam nodded and stood. I'll call him. She stepped out the door, pulled out her phone, and typed a short message. She's awake. She wants to see you. Less than 30 seconds later, the reply came. I'm coming up. The door opened without a sound. Theron Kane stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway, gray eyes sweeping the room before stopping on the hospital bed. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, blue veins standing out along his forearms. The faint scar on his face looked sharper in the morning light, a line that warned of a past no one was allowed to ask about. Celeste looked at him, and she recognized him instantly. Those gray eyes cold as steel, the hard line of his square jaw, the way he stood, spine straight, alert, like a panther ready to strike at any second. 8 months ago, she'd thought he was a hallucination. A dark angel her mind invented in pain and desperation. But he was real. He was standing here, and he'd saved her. Again. It was you, Celeste said, her voice rough. The man in the parking lot. Theron didn't answer. He walked to the bedside and stopped an arm's length away, eyes lowered to her pale face. You're awake, he said. Not a question. A statement. Like he was simply confirming a fact. Celeste tried to sit up, her arms trembling as she pushed against the mattress. Theron didn't help her. He only stood there, watching, waiting. When she managed to sit with her back against the raised headboard, breathing hard, she lifted her eyes to his. Why? She asked. Why did you save me? Theron didn't answer right away. He moved to the window and looked out at Lake Michigan, glittering under the sun. His back was to her, shoulders broad, straight, not a trace of tension. Why did you watch me for 8 months? Celeste pressed, her voice harder now. Why did you get me out of the hospital? Why are you keeping me here? Who are you? Silence stretched. Theron didn't turn. He stood there like stone, eyes still fixed on the water. You owe me an answer, Celeste said, her voice shaking but firm. I was dead. The whole world thinks I'm dead. My babies are with the man who beat me for 3 years, and you're standing there in silence like nothing is happening. You owe me an answer. Theron turned. His gray eyes met her gray-green ones. Their gazes collided, neither of them yielding. I don't owe anyone anything, he said, voice cold as ice. I saved you because I wanted to. I watched you because I wanted to. I brought you here because I wanted to. There's no other reason. Celeste stared at him without blinking. She didn't believe him. No one did those things without a reason. No one watched a stranger for 8 months just because they wanted to. She looked down at her body. Her belly was flat now beneath the loose hospital gown. She pressed her hand to her stomach, where 2 months ago 2 small lives had been kicking, twisting, living. 23 days ago she'd delivered them, and she hadn't been allowed to see them. Not once. You're their father, aren't you? Celeste asked, her eyes still on her belly. Her voice was strangely calm, like she'd known the answer for a long time. Silence, longer than every silence before it. Celeste looked up at Theron. He stood there with a blank face, but his hand had clenched tight, knuckles gone white. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. And that silence was a clearer answer than any words could be. Celeste understood. She'd understood for a long time, ever since she counted the days, ever since she realized Bradley couldn't be the father because that night she'd been in the hospital with a stranger. But hearing the confirmation, even as silence, still stabbed her heart. "I wrote about you in the letter," Celeste said, softer now. "I wrote that I didn't know your name, didn't know who you were, only that you were the man who saved me. And I hoped, somehow, you'd find the letter." "I found it," Theron said. "And the USB, and all the evidence." Celeste nodded. "So you know what Bradley did to me. You know what he is." "I know. And you know your children, our children, are with him," Celeste said, her voice hardening. "Rosalie and Finnegan, 2 weeks old, in the house where I was beaten, being cared for by the woman who slept with my husband for 2 years, being called Bradley Whitmore's children, by a man who doesn't deserve to be called anyone's father." Theron didn't speak. He just stood there looking at her, cold but no longer empty. Something else was in his eyes now, something Celeste couldn't name. "I need to get my children back," Celeste said, each word clear, slow, like she was carving them into stone. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do. I don't know why you have a mansion like this, and private nurses, and someone watching me for 8 months. But I know you have power. I can see it in how people look at you, in how Miriam talks about you, in how you stand, how you look, how you breathe. You have power, and I need that power." She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, her knees shaking but holding, one hand gripping the bed rail to keep her balance. She looked straight into Theron Kane's eyes, the most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago, the man the entire city called the Ghost. "Help me get my babies back," she said, "and I'll do anything you ask." Theron looked at her for a long time. The woman was thin and pale, just awake after 23 days in a coma, standing in front of him with trembling legs and eyes that didn't tremble at all. She just said she'd do anything. He'd heard that line hundreds of times, from hundreds of different people. Men drowning in debt, people begging for their lives, people willing to sell their souls for what they wanted. But the way she said it was different. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't begging. It was a statement. A deal. "I can kill him," Theron said, calm as if he were talking about the weather. "One call, and Bradley Whitmore disappears tonight, and no one will ever find his body." Celeste shook her head. No thinking. No hesitation. Just one final word. "No." Theron lifted an eyebrow, because almost no one refused him. She was refusing him, not because of morality. He could see that in her eyes. There was no mercy in those gray-green eyes. Only calculation. "Why not?" "Because he'd die too easily," Celeste said. "I don't want him dead. I want him alive. Alive to watch me take everything back. Alive to witness himself losing the babies, losing the house, losing the money, losing his name. Alive to be humiliated in front of everyone he's lied to." She took one step closer, one hand still gripping the bed rail, her gaze never leaving Theron. "I want him to wake up every morning knowing the wife he thought he'd killed came back from the dead to ruin his life. I want him to see my face in every nightmare he has. I want him alive, and I want him living in hell." Silence stretched. Theron stood there watching her, and for the first time in many years, he felt something close to astonishment. He'd met plenty of women, greedy ones, weak ones, clever ones, innocent ones, but he'd never met anyone like her. "You're not like the women I've met," he said, his voice carrying something different now, softer, like he was seeing her for the first time. Celeste smiled, a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Because I've already died once," she said. "When you've died, there's nothing left to fear. Not pain, not loss, not anything Bradley Whitmore can do. He took everything from me. Now I'm going to take everything from him." Theron walked to the window and turned his back to her, staring out at Lake Michigan. He stayed silent for a moment, thinking. "I have lawyers," he said at last. "The best in Chicago. They can do everything the legal way, or close enough to legal." He turned to face her. "I'll help you get your children back, get everything back, and destroy Bradley Whitmore the way you want. But there's a condition." "What condition?" "You stay here," Theron said, "in this mansion, until it's finished." Celeste frowned. "Why?" "Because you're still weak. You need time to recover. You need doctors. You need protection. Bradley Whitmore might not be dangerous to me, but he's still dangerous to you. If he finds out you're alive before we're ready, he could do something stupid. And I don't want to clean up that mess." Celeste looked at him, weighing it. Is there another reason? Theron went quiet for a beat. Then he spoke, lower now, almost reluctant. "Those babies are mine." His words landed heavy, like he wasn't used to saying them out loud. "And my children need their mother. Alive, healthy, unhurt. If you stay here, I can make sure of that. If you walk out there, I can't." Celeste watched him longer. For the first time since she woke up, she saw something else in those cold gray eyes. Not cruelty, not calculation. Something like care, rough and clumsy, buried under layers of ice, but still care. "You don't just want to protect me," she said slowly. "You want to protect your children." "We don't have to separate those things," Theron answered. "You're safe. They're safe. It's that simple." Celeste nodded. She understood. This was a deal. An alliance. She needed his power. He needed her alive to raise his children. Neither of them spoke about feelings. Neither of them needed to. "I agree," she said. "I'll stay. Until it's over." Theron nodded once. "Good." He walked toward the door and stopped with his hand on the knob. "You should rest," he said without turning back. "The next 2 months are going to be long, and you'll need every ounce of strength to face what's coming." The door closed. Celeste sat back on the bed and stared out the window at Lake Michigan, sparkling under the sun. She'd died once. She'd come back. And now she was going to return from the dead and take back everything that belonged to her. Bradley Whitmore didn't know what was coming, but he would. Soon. 2 months. 60 days. 1,440 hours. That was how long Celeste Morrow needed to turn herself from a woman waking from a coma into a warrior ready for battle. In the first week, she could only take a few steps before her legs started shaking, and she had to sit down. Her body had been through too much. Pregnancy under violence, a premature birth, massive blood loss, a coma. Every muscle was weak, every joint ached, but she didn't allow herself to lie still. Every morning she woke at 6, before the sun rose over Lake Michigan. She walked circles around the room, 10 steps, then 20, then 50, then 100. She trained until her legs stopped trembling, until she could go down the stairs without gripping the railing, until she could stand straight and look into the mirror without recognizing the thin, pale woman staring back. The nurses fed her meals packed with nutrients, designed by a specialist. Protein, vitamins, minerals. She ate every bite, not because it tasted good, because she needed strength. She needed this body to work, to fight, to survive. In the second week, Miriam brought her the envelope she'd hidden in her belongings bag, the envelope she'd prepared before climbing onto the delivery table when she thought she wouldn't make it. Celeste sat on the bed, opened it, and pulled out the handwritten letter. Her own handwriting, slanting to the right, shaky in places. She began to read. She relived every desperate word she had penned in the shadow of death, feeling the weight of the mother she had been, a woman who believed her only way to save her babies was to die. Each sentence was a painful reminder of the hell she had escaped, and the miracle that she was still here to finish the fight. When she finished, Celeste cried. For the first time since she woke up. She wasn't crying from pain. She was crying from relief. She'd written that letter believing she was going to die. She'd prepared everything to protect her children from beyond the grave. And somehow, a miracle had happened. She was still alive. She could still fight for herself. In the third week, she watched what was on the USB. Theron lent her a laptop and sat beside her in silence as she opened each file. The first video. Bradley beating her in the bedroom. She'd hidden the camera inside the clock on the nightstand, the angle clear, the sound clear, her pleading, his snarling, fists striking flesh. Celeste watched without blinking. The second video. Bradley hitting her in the kitchen. The third in the living room. The fourth in the garage. 17 videos. 17 times. 17 pieces of proof no one could deny. Then the messages. Hundreds of messages between Bradley and Paige. Screenshots she'd taken from his phone when he was drunk. Love talk, plans, secret meetings, and messages about her, about how she might not survive the delivery, about what Bradley would do with the insurance money, about how Paige would move into the house right after Celeste died. They'd planned it. They'd waited for her to die. Last came the money laundering evidence. Excel files, fake invoices, suspicious transactions running through Bradley's real estate brokerage. Celeste didn't understand every number, but she understood enough to know it was illegal. She closed the laptop and looked at Theron. "Is it enough?" she asked. Theron nodded. "More than enough." In the 4th week, Theron brought his legal team to meet her. 3 of them, all in expensive suits, with leather briefcases and the eyes of predators. They didn't work for any firm with a name on a sign. They worked for Theron Kane, and they were very good at destroying someone's life in ways that were legal. They reviewed the evidence, asked questions, took notes. They explained the legal process to Celeste, that she'd been declared dead and needed medical records to prove she was alive, that Bradley had collected the insurance money and that was fraud if she was still living, about custody and how to request a DNA test. In the 5th week, Celeste signed the complaint. Her identity was protected, not made public yet. The filing went in as a request from the legal representative of the 2 children, Rosalie and Finnegan, asking the court to verify guardianship before granting it to Bradley Whitmore. Reason? There was evidence suggesting Mr. Whitmore might not be the biological father of the children. Request? A mandatory DNA test. In the 6th week, the court approved it. Bradley Whitmore received a summons ordering him and the babies to appear for DNA collection. Miriam reported he'd been furious. He smashed his phone against a wall and shouted that this was an insult, but he had no choice but to comply. In the 7th and 8th weeks, Celeste kept recovering. She exercised every day. She ate what she needed. She read the case file the lawyers prepared. She learned how to control her emotions, how to answer questions, how to face Bradley without shaking. And every night before sleep, she looked at the ultrasound photo she kept with her. 2 tiny shapes, Rosalie and Finnegan. Her babies were out there, in the house where she'd been beaten, being cared for by people who didn't love them, but not for long. She was going to take them back, no matter the cost. Courtroom 7, Cook County Family Court, Chicago. 9 in the morning. Bradley Whitmore walked in wearing a navy suit, a red tie, hair neatly combed, the confident smile of a man who believed he'd already won. Paige McAllister walked beside him in an elegant black dress, makeup done carefully, an engagement ring flashing on her hand, brand new, the one Bradley bought her 2 weeks earlier. Behind them was Beatrice Whitmore, Bradley's mother, 62 years old, silver hair cut short, eyes sharp as razors. She'd hired Prescott Grant, one of the most expensive family lawyers in Chicago, to make sure her son got official custody. They were here to finish paperwork. Bradley's wife was dead. The babies needed a father. Bradley was the father. Paige would be the stepmother. Simple. They thought this was a routine formality. They were wrong. When Bradley sat at the table on the right with his lawyer, he glanced at the table on the left and saw a man he'd never met. 50 years old, salt and pepper hair, gold-rimmed glasses, a suit more expensive than Prescott Grant's. The man sat alone, no client beside him. "Who's that?" Bradley murmured to his attorney. Prescott Grant frowned, flipping through the file. "The attorney appointed to represent the children's interests. Court appointed. I didn't know who they were assigning." Bradley shrugged, unconcerned. He turned back to Paige and winked. She smiled and slid her hand onto his thigh beneath the table. The judge entered. A woman of 55 with gray hair and sharp eyes, not the kind who looked easily impressed by expensive suits or charming smiles. She sat, struck the gavel, and called the hearing to order. Prescott Grant stood and presented the custody petition. "My client, Mr. Bradley Whitmore, is the biological father of the 2 children, Rosalie and Finnegan Whitmore. Their mother, Mrs. Celeste Whitmore, passed away during childbirth nearly 3 months ago. Mr. Whitmore is the natural and legal guardian of the children. We ask the court to officially grant sole custody to Mr. Whitmore and his partner, Miss Paige McAllister, as stepmother." The judge nodded, then turned to the mysterious man. "Counsel for the children's interests, do you have any objection?" The man stood, slow and composed. "Your Honor, my name is Harrison Wells, representing the interests of the newborns Rosalie and Finnegan. Before the court decides custody, I request a DNA test to confirm the biological relationship between Mr. Bradley Whitmore and the children." The courtroom fell silent. Bradley shot to his feet, face flushing with anger. "This is an insult," he snapped. "Of course I'm the father. Celeste was my wife. We've been married 4 years. Those babies are mine. The judge struck the gavel. Mr. Whitmore, sit down and control yourself. Bradley sucked in a breath and sat, but his fist clenched under the table. Prescott Grant rose, scrambling to salvage the moment. Your Honor, this request is completely baseless. There is no evidence suggesting my client is not the biological father. This is nothing but a delaying tactic. Harrison Wells smiled, the smile of a fox. If Mr. Whitmore is certain he's the father, then a DNA test won't be a problem, will it? The test takes 2 weeks. If it matches, he gets custody. If it doesn't, the court needs the truth before placing 2 newborns with a man who has no biological relation to them. The judge looked at Bradley. Mr. Whitmore, do you object to the DNA test? Bradley scanned the room. Beatrice stared at him, signaling him to agree. Page held his hand under the table, squeezing gently to calm him. Prescott Grant gave a small nod, telling him this wasn't a big deal. No, Bradley said, voice tight. I don't object, because I am the biological father. The test will prove it. The judge nodded. The request is granted. DNA testing will be conducted within 1 week. Results will be presented at the next hearing, 2 weeks from today. Today's hearing is continued. She struck the gavel, stood, and left the room. Bradley stayed seated, watching Harrison Wells walk out. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones, but he didn't know what. That night, he lay in bed beside Paige, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Paige had fallen asleep long ago, breathing evenly, one arm draped across his chest. But Bradley didn't sleep. His mind spun in circles. A DNA test. Why was there a DNA test? Why was there a lawyer representing the babies? Who hired that lawyer? Then a memory flashed through his mind. 8 months ago, Celeste had left in the night. She hadn't said anything, hadn't left a message. He'd woken at 3 in the morning and the bed beside him was empty. She came back the next morning, clothes wrinkled, eyes shadowed, and she didn't say a word about where she'd been. He'd beaten her for it, beaten her so badly she couldn't get out of bed for 2 days, and she still didn't talk. Back then, he'd assumed she was trying to run, assumed she went to some cheap motel and returned because she had no money. He hadn't thought beyond that. But now, lying in the dark with the DNA test hanging over his head, he began to consider another possibility, one he'd never allowed himself to see. Who was she with that night? Bradley Whitmore lay perfectly still, his heart beating faster, his hand crushing the sheet. For the first time in his life, he began to doubt. 2 weeks later, Courtroom 7, Cook County Family Court, 9 in the morning. The room was more crowded than last time. More reporters, more curious onlookers, more unfamiliar faces Bradley didn't recognize. The rumor had spread. Someone had leaked the information about the DNA request. Someone had whispered that the widow who died in childbirth might not have been faithful. Chicago loved a scandal, and this one had every ingredient to become a citywide obsession. Bradley sat at the table on the right, still in the navy suit, still with the red tie, still wearing that confident smile. But anyone watching closely could see the dark circles under his eyes, the way he kept twisting his wedding ring on his finger, the way he swallowed hard every time he glanced toward the door. For the past 2 weeks, he'd barely slept. The test results had been delivered to his house 3 days earlier. A white envelope, stamped with the lab seal, his name printed in bold on the front. He'd opened it. He'd read it. He'd read it again. He'd read it a 3rd time. Then he'd ripped the envelope to pieces, thrown it into the trash, and told himself there had to be an error. There had to be. They'd mixed up the samples. They'd botched the procedure. This was someone's plot to ruin him. He'd called Prescott Grant and demanded that his lawyer make the court read the official result. If the result was read in court, in front of everyone, he could object immediately. He could demand a retest. He could prove it was a mistake. At least that was what he kept telling himself. Paige sat in the row behind, makeup heavier than usual, trying to hide the tight worry lines around her eyes. She'd seen the result too. She'd watched Bradley shred the envelope and scream like a madman. She'd started to wonder if she'd bet on the wrong horse. Beatrice sat beside the attorney, back perfectly straight, face unreadable. She'd lived 62 years. She'd seen enough scandals to know how to control her expression in any situation. But inside, she was calculating. If Bradley wasn't the biological father, then those babies weren't her biological grandchildren. And if they weren't her grandchildren, she had no reason to stay tangled in this mess. The judge entered, Everyone stood. She sat, struck the gavel, and called the hearing back to order. Before we begin, I have the DNA test results that have been provided to the parties, the judge said, her tone steady. Mr. Whitmore, you've received the results, correct? Bradley nodded, trying to keep his voice calm. Yes, Your Honor, but I believe there's been an error. I'm asking the court to read the official results so I can object. The judge studied him for a moment, then opened the envelope on her bench. She put on her glasses and looked down at the paper inside. The room went silent. Not a sound. Not a breath. As if the entire courtroom was holding itself still. DNA test results performed by 3 independent laboratories, the judge began, reading clearly, word by word. Laboratory 1, Gentech Diagnostics. Laboratory 2, Biomed-Analysis. Laboratory 3, National DNA Center. All 3 laboratories report consistent results. She lifted her gaze and looked straight into Bradley's eyes. Bradley Whitmore is not the biological father of Rosalie and Finnegan. Probability of biological relationship, 0%. The courtroom erupted. Murmurs, whispers, someone sucking in a shocked breath. Reporters started writing like their hands were on fire. Camera flashes sparked beyond the glass. Bradley shot to his feet, face red with fury. No, he shouted. This is a mistake. They did it wrong. I'm the father of those babies. Celeste was my wife. She can't. She would never dare. He spun toward his attorney, voice tipping into hysteria. Do something. Demand a retest. This is a conspiracy. Someone's coming after me. Prescott Grant stood, but instead of walking toward the judge's bench, he walked toward the exit. Your Honor, he said, voice flat, I'm withdrawing from this case. I no longer represent Mr. Whitmore. Bradley stared as his lawyer walked out of the courtroom, his mouth hanging open. Paige sat behind him, pale as a corpse. She looked at Bradley, looked at the door closing behind the lawyer, and she knew. She'd bet on the wrong horse. Everything was collapsing. Beatrice rose without a word. She picked up her handbag, stepped out of the row, and walked toward the door. She didn't look at her son. She didn't look at Paige. She simply walked out, back straight, chin lifted, as if she didn't know anyone in this courtroom. Mom, Bradley called, his voice shaking. Mom, wait. Beatrice didn't stop. She went through the doorway, and the door shut behind her. The courtroom was chaos. The judge struck the gavel again and again, calling for order. Bradley stood in the middle of it all, alone. No lawyer, no mother, no one left on his side. Paige stayed seated in the back row, eyes down, too afraid to look at anyone. And in the middle of the chaos, Harrison Wells sat at the left table, smiling, the smile of a man who knew the best part of the performance still hadn't begun. The judge struck the gavel once more, her voice cutting through the noise. Order. If Mr. Whitmore is not the biological father of the children, the court must know who the biological father is before deciding custody. Mr. Wells, do you have information on that matter? Harrison Wells stood, slow and composed. Your Honor, he said. I do. And at that exact moment, the courtroom door opened. The courtroom doors opened. No one knew what was about to happen. No one was prepared for this. A woman stepped inside. A simple white dress, tailored cleanly, flattering the body she'd rebuilt over months of recovery. Dark brown hair swept into a high bun, exposing the graceful line of her neck and a pair of small pearl earrings. Her steps were steady, her back straight, her chin lifted. No shaking, no hesitation. Like she'd been born to walk into this room, into this moment. Celeste Morrow, the wife who was dead, the mother who'd been cremated, the woman the whole world believed was lying beneath the earth. She was standing here, alive, breathing, walking. The courtroom went still, not a sound, not a breath, as if time had stopped, as if everyone inside was watching a ghost step out of the grave. Bradley Whitmore was the first to react. He stumbled back a step, eyes blown wide, face drained white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then he managed to speak, voice shaking, almost a whisper. Impossible. Celeste kept walking, her gaze locked on him. You're dead, he said, louder now, like he was trying to convince himself. I got the death certificate. I got the insurance payout. You were cremated. You can't be here. You can't be alive. Celeste stopped 3 steps away from him. She looked into the eyes of the man who'd beaten her for 3 years. The man who'd cheated with his coworker under her own roof. The man who'd called his mistress when his wife had just gone still on the delivery table. And she smiled. A cold smile that never reached her eyes. "I did die," she said, her voice clear, carrying through the silent courtroom. My heart stopped on the delivery table. The doctor pronounced the time of death. The certificate was signed. She tilted her head and looked at him the way you'd look at an insect. "But someone saved me." In the back row, Paige McAllister stared at Celeste, eyes wide, lips trembling. She tried to stand, tried to speak, but her legs didn't obey. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed into the seat, unconscious. No one noticed. Every gaze was pinned to Celeste. The judge was the first to find her voice again. She cleared her throat, trying to keep it professional even as her hand tightened around her pen. "Who are you?" "I'm Celeste Morrow," Celeste answered, turning toward the judge. "Formerly Celeste Whitmore, the legal wife of Bradley Whitmore, the biological mother of Rosalie and Finnegan." "But you were declared dead." "Yes, Your Honor," Celeste nodded. "And I have all documentation proving I'm alive and that my recovery has been handled legally." Harrison Wells stood and stepped to Celeste's side, opened his leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Your Honor," he said, "these are my client's medical records, including the report from Dr. Nina Harlow, who declared her deceased. Reports from 3 independent physicians confirming she entered a deep coma, not clinical death. Medical witnesses confirming she was found alive 3 hours after the time of death was pronounced. And treatment records from a private medical facility over the past 3 months." He placed the file on the judge's bench. "Everything is lawful, Your Honor. My client did not fake her death. She was mistakenly declared dead, and she was rescued by a third party before her body was processed." The judge scanned the file, her eyes moving quickly down the pages. Bradley stood there, sweat sliding down his temple, not knowing what to do. "This is a con," he said, voice tipping toward hysteria. "She's lying to the court. She can't be alive. I saw the death certificate. I received the ashes." Celeste turned back to him, her gaze ice cold. "You received ashes," she repeated. "Did you open the box and look? Did you check whether it was really my ashes? Or did you rush to collect the insurance money and move your mistress into my bed?" Bradley didn't answer. He couldn't, because she was right. He hadn't checked. He hadn't cared. He'd only wanted her dead, and when she was declared dead, he'd celebrated. The judge set the file down and looked at Celeste. "Miss Morrow, if you truly are alive and the biological mother of the children, what are you requesting before this court today?" Celeste stood tall, gray-green eyes blazing. "I'm requesting custody of my children, Your Honor. I'm requesting the court revoke any temporary guardianship granted to Bradley Whitmore, and I'm requesting the court hear evidence that he abused me throughout our 3-year marriage." The courtroom erupted again. Whispers, furious note-taking, camera flashes sparking beyond the glass. Bradley stood in the middle of the chaos, alone, isolated, his world collapsing around him. And Celeste Morrow, the wife he thought he'd killed, stood there alive, strong, ready to take back everything he'd stolen. But she wasn't finished, and she didn't come alone. The courtroom doors opened again. This time, no one could breathe. Theron Kane walked in, over 6 feet tall, a perfectly tailored black suit without a single wrinkle. Black hair swept back, gray eyes cold as steel sweeping the room, and everything they touched seemed to freeze. A faint scar ran from his temple down to the left side of his jaw, a souvenir from a life no one dared ask about. He didn't hurry. Each step echoed on the wooden floor, steady, certain, like a war drum. He didn't look at anyone. Not the judge, not the reporters, not Bradley Whitmore, trembling in the center of the room. He only looked at Celeste, and he walked to stand beside her. "The ghost," someone whispered in the crowd. The name spread like fire through dry grass. The ghost, Theron Kane, the boss. Everyone in this courtroom knew that name, not from the newspapers, because Theron Kane never appeared in them. Not from police files, because no one had proof against him. But from stories whispered in the dark, from rumors about the man who controlled the Port of Chicago, the underground banking network, and half the South Side. From legends about someone no one saw and lived to tell about. And now he was here, in broad daylight, in a courtroom packed with reporters and cameras, beside a woman who'd just walked back from the dead. The judge looked at him, trying to keep her composure, though her hand was trembling slightly beneath the bench. "Who are you?" Theron didn't answer right away. He reached into his suit pocket, drew out an envelope, and placed it on the judge's bench beside Harrison Wells's file. Then he spoke, voice low and deep, carrying through the silent courtroom. I'm Theron Kane. I'm the biological father of Rosalie and Finnegan, and this is the mother of my children. He placed his hand on Celeste's back, a gesture gentle but loaded with possession. Celeste didn't flinch. She stood beside him, as if that was where she belonged. The judge opened the envelope and skimmed the contents. Her face paled for a moment, then steadied. This is your DNA test result, she said. Yes. Theron nodded. The test was performed by 3 independent labs, same as Mr. Whitmore's. The result is that I'm the biological father of both children. Probability of match, 99.99%. The courtroom exploded. Gasps, shouts, cameras clicking nonstop. The judge struck the gavel, but no one heard. Every gaze was fixed on Theron Kane, on Celeste Morrow, on Bradley Whitmore shaking like a leaf in a storm. Bradley backed up. 1 step, 2. His spine hit the table behind him, and he couldn't retreat any farther. He stared at Theron Kane, and for the first time in his life, Bradley Whitmore was truly afraid. Not afraid of losing the babies. He'd never loved those children. Not afraid of losing money. Money could be made again. Not afraid of prison. A lawyer could handle that. He was afraid of the man standing in front of him. He was afraid of the cold gray eyes watching him without blinking. He was afraid of the scar on that man's face. The scar of someone who'd survived things Bradley couldn't even imagine. He was afraid of the way Theron Kane stood, breathed, existed, like a predator measuring its prey. Bradley remembered the night 8 months ago. The hospital parking lot. He'd been hitting Celeste when someone appeared. He hadn't seen the face in the dark. He'd only felt a hand clamp around his throat from behind, the brutal strength, and a flash of ice-cold eyes in the night. He'd run. He'd been too terrified to stay. And now the man from that night was standing in front of him, in a courtroom, claiming the children Bradley thought were his. Bradley wanted to scream, to protest, to say this was a conspiracy, a setup, a trick. But his mouth was dry. His tongue wouldn't move. He only stood there shaking, watching the world he'd built collapse piece by piece. Theron Kane looked at him without hatred, without anger, only indifference. The gaze of someone looking at an insect about to be crushed under a boot. And in that moment, Bradley knew his life was over. The courtroom doors opened for the 3rd time. But this time it wasn't to welcome someone back from the dead. This time it was the police. 4 officers in uniform stepped in with stern faces and hands resting on their belts, where the handcuffs glinted under the lights. They didn't look at the judge. They didn't look at Celeste or Theron. They only looked at Bradley Whitmore. Bradley Whitmore, the lead officer said, his voice carrying through the courtroom that had gone paper silent. You are under arrest pursuant to a Cook County court warrant. Charges: domestic violence, insurance fraud, perjury. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Bradley stood there, not running, not resisting. He didn't have the strength left to do anything. His feet felt nailed to the floor. His arms hung limp at his sides, his eyes fixed on nothing at all. When the officer stepped up, turned him, and cuffed his hands behind his back, he didn't say a word. The metallic click of the cuffs locking shut rang out in the silent courtroom. Cold, sharp, final. The sound of justice. Or at least, the sound of the beginning of justice. In the back row, Paige McAllister had just come to. She jolted upright, eyes confused, not understanding what was happening. Then she saw Bradley in handcuffs, saw the officers reading him his Miranda rights, saw Celeste standing there alive and strong, looking at her with an expression that held no mercy. No, Paige whispered. No, no, no. She tried to stand, tried to bolt for the door, but the second officer was already blocking her path. Paige McAllister. You are under arrest as an accomplice in insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Paige screamed and struggled, trying to wrench free. I didn't do anything, she yelled. I just loved him. I don't know anything about insurance. I'm not guilty. No one answered her. The cuffs snapped shut. She was dragged out of the courtroom, still screaming, still crying, mascara streaking into black rivers down her cheeks. The courtroom fell silent again. The judge struck the gavel, not to call for order, but as if she needed the sound to reclaim control after everything that had just happened. Before the court issues a custody determination, she said, her voice steadier now, I want to hear more about the circumstances of this case. Mr. Wells, does Miss Morrow have additional evidence? Harrison Wells stood with a single sheet in his hand. Your Honor, I do. I have a letter. A letter written by my client, Celeste Morrow, before she went onto the delivery table. She wrote it because she believed she wouldn't survive. She wanted to leave a final message for whoever might find it. He handed the letter to the judge, then turned to face the courtroom. With the court's permission, I'd like to read an excerpt. The judge nodded. Harrison Wells cleared his throat and began, his voice slow and clear, word by word. If someone is reading this, it means I didn't survive. The courtroom went still again. No breathing, no movement, only Harrison Wells's voice carrying each word Celeste had written in tears and desperation. I knew this could happen. My body was too weak. This pregnancy was too hard. But I don't regret it. My children deserve to live, even if I have to pay with my life. Bradley is not the biological father of my children. Their biological father is the man who saved me in the hospital parking lot 8 months ago. I don't know his name. I don't know who he is. But I know he's a good man. He's the only person who ever looked at me like I was human. Harrison Wells paused, then continued. If somehow the man in the parking lot is reading this, please know I never forgot you. I never forgot that night. You gave me the 2 most precious things in my life, hope, and our children. He read the final line, his voice dropping lower. I don't know your name, but I know you'll find this letter. I know you'll come to the babies. Please protect them. Please let them know their mother fought until her last breath. Harrison Wells set the letter down and returned to his seat. The courtroom stayed silent. No one spoke. No one dared. Celeste stood there with tears running down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She wasn't ashamed of them. They were the tears of a mother who'd fought to the end, and beside her, Theron Kane stood motionless, his hand clenched into a fist, knuckles bleached white, his jaw tightened, the muscles in his face drew taut, like he was holding something back. The ghost, the man who killed without blinking, the man who built a criminal empire on other people's blood and tears, the man Chicago feared. He was standing in a courtroom, listening to a letter written by a woman who believed she was going to die, a woman who didn't even know his name but still trusted he would come and protect their children. And for the first time in his life, Theron Kane couldn't speak. Not because he didn't want to, because his throat tightened. Because something rose in his chest, something he'd buried for 28 years, since the night his mother died, something dangerously close to tears. He didn't cry. The ghost didn't cry, but he stood there in silence, his fist clenched, and for the first time in many years, he felt human. 1 year later, the Lake Forest mansion still sat on the hill overlooking Lake Michigan, but it wasn't cold anymore. Afternoon light streamed through the glass, spilling into the wide living room where 2 babies were wobbling through their first steps on a soft fur rug. Rosalie went first, unsteady but determined, gray-green eyes exactly like her mother's, bright with focus. She fell, pushed herself up, then stood again. No crying, no quitting. Finnegan followed behind her, slower, more careful, 1 step at a time, like he was calculating the trajectory before he moved. His gray eyes were his father's, cool and observant, but when he saw his mother with her arms open, those eyes lit up, and he smiled. A toothless, drooling smile. The most beautiful thing in the world. Celeste sat on the floor with her legs folded, arms spread wide to catch them. She wasn't gaunt the way she used to be. Color had returned to her cheeks. Light had returned to her eyes. Her hair was longer now, loose over her shoulders, shimmering in the afternoon sun. She smiled as Rosalie wobbled toward her, tiny hands stretched forward for balance. "Good job, baby girl," Celeste said, her voice full of love. "Come to Mommy." Rosalie took 2 more steps and then toppled into her mother's arms, laughing. Celeste hugged her, kissed the soft hair, breathed in the scent of milk and baby powder. The scent of happiness, the scent of peace, the scent she'd thought she would never smell again. In the doorway of the living room, Theron Kane stood still, one shoulder against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. How long he'd been there, Celeste didn't know. He always appeared like a ghost, silent, without warning. But she didn't fear it anymore. She was used to it. She'd come to love it. Finnegan spotted his father, laughed bigger, and tried to toddle toward him. Theron didn't move right away. He just stood there, watching his son wobble closer, and the cold gray of his eyes softened a little. Only a little, but enough for Celeste to notice. He wasn't a man who knew how to love. No one had taught him. He'd grown up with violence, with blood, with death. But he was learning. Day by day, moment by moment. He was learning how to be a father. Theron walked into the room and caught Finnegan before he fell, lifting him up and settling him in his arms. The baby grabbed his collar, drooled down his shoulder, and Theron didn't seem bothered at all. He just looked down at his son, then over at Celeste holding Rosalie, and he crossed the room to sit beside her on the floor. 2 adults, 2 babies, sitting in the living room while the afternoon sun draped over them like a golden blanket, like a family. Theron set Finnegan down beside Rosalie and let the babies play together. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box, placing it in front of Celeste. Celeste looked at the box, then at him. She opened it. Inside was a ring. Not too big, not too flashy. A simple diamond set in white gold. Refined, elegant, beautiful in a way Celeste had never believed she deserved to own. "Are you proposing to me?" she asked, her voice light as breath. Theron looked at her, and his gray eyes weren't ice anymore. Something warmer lived there now, something he'd never let anyone see. "I'm asking if you want to stay," he said. Celeste looked at him for a long time. She thought about everything that had happened. 3 years of hell with Bradley, the night in the parking lot, 9 months of pregnancy and fear, death on the delivery table, the return to life, the courtroom, justice, the past year, living in this mansion, raising her babies, regaining her strength, learning how to trust a man again. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know what it meant to live with a Mafia boss. She didn't know if she was making the right decision. But she knew one thing. She wanted to stay. Celeste lifted the ring and slid it onto her left ring finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. The ring on her hand was the answer. The way her eyes met his was the answer. The way she rested her head on his shoulder, for the first time, was the answer. Theron didn't speak. He just sat there, letting her lean against him, watching their babies crawl across the rug. And for the first time in 36 years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Metropolitan Correctional Center, Chicago. Cell 417. Bradley Whitmore sat on the narrow iron bunk, his back against the cold concrete wall, his eyes fixed on nothing. 18 months. He'd been here 18 months. 7 more years before he'd even be considered for parole. 7 years inside gray walls, with the 5 o'clock alarm screaming every morning, with bland food, with other inmates looking at him with contempt when they learned he was here for beating his wife. In prison, men who hit women sat at the bottom of the food chain. He'd learned that the most painful way. A guard walked up and tossed an envelope through the bars. "Mail for you, Whitmore." Bradley watched it land on the floor. No return name. Only the prison address and his own name written in a beautiful, flowing hand he recognized. He picked it up and opened it. Inside was a photograph. He stared at it, and his heart missed a beat. Celeste. She was sitting on green grass, hair blown by the wind, smiling bright. Beside her sat Theron Kane, sleeves rolled on a white shirt, no suit, none of that usual cold distance, looking at her with an expression Bradley had never seen on any man, the look of love. Between them were 2 children, Rosalie and Finnegan. A year and a half now, laughing, playing, happy. A family that should have been his, but never was. Bradley flipped the photo over. On the back was one line, "Thank you for giving me a reason to fight." He ground his teeth. His hands started shaking with rage. He tore the picture in half, then into 4, then into 8. He threw the scraps to the floor, stomped them, crushed them under his shoe. But the image had already burned itself into his mind. Celeste smiling, Theron watching her. 2 happy children, a perfect family he didn't belong to. He would see that picture every night when he closed his eyes, every morning when he woke, every second of every minute of the 7 years left on his sentence. It was the perfect revenge, not death. Life. Life spent watching other people be happy while he rotted behind bars. At the same time, back at the Lake Forest mansion, the night had gone late. Lake Michigan glittered under the moon, waves brushing the shore like a lullaby. In the nursery upstairs, Celeste sat in a rocking chair between two cribs. Rosalie was on the left, asleep deep, one hand gripping the ear of a stuffed bunny. Finnegan was on the right, eyes half shut, drifting toward sleep but still fighting to stay awake just to hear his mother sing. Celeste sang a lullaby. No words, only melody. A melody she didn't know where she'd learned. Maybe from some foster mother when she was small. Maybe from a movie she watched in the orphanage. She couldn't remember. But the tune had lived inside her all her life, waiting for the day she could sing it to her children. Finnegan closed his eyes, his breathing steady, and finally fell asleep. Celeste stopped singing and looked at them both, tears filling her eyes even though she wasn't sad. They were happy tears. Tears from a mother who once believed she'd never get to watch her babies grow. In the doorway, Theron stood still, one shoulder against the frame, and he'd been there for who knew how long. He didn't speak. He only listened to her song, watched her sitting between the two cribs, and felt something warm spreading through his chest. Celeste looked up and saw him. "Don't you need sleep?" she whispered, careful not to wake the children. Theron watched her for a long moment, his gray eyes softening in the pale glow of the nightlight. "I am sleeping," he said. "And this is the most beautiful dream I've ever had." Celeste smiled and rose from the rocking chair, stepping to him. She placed her hand on his chest and felt the steady beat beneath the fabric. He wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on the crown of her head, and they stood there in the nursery doorway, watching their children sleep. People will tell this story like a tragedy. A young mother dying on the delivery table, a cheating husband, a greedy mistress, a courtroom, a scandal. But that isn't the real story. The real story is about a woman who loved her children so fiercely she prepared for her own death just to protect them. About a mother who wrote a letter, gathered evidence, and fought to her last breath. About a wife who died but refused to stay in the ground when her babies needed her. And about a man who lived his whole life in darkness but was willing to step into the light for a woman and 2 children. This is the story of a wife who died. And this is the story of how she came back to life. This story leaves us with a deep lesson about love and the strength of women. No matter how far life pushes you into the darkest corner, no matter how much you think you've lost, remember that as long as you're still breathing, you can still fight. A mother's love for her children is limitless power, strong enough to cross death, strong enough to break every barrier. And sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones who've been hurt the deepest. If you felt this story touch your heart, please hit the like button, share it with the people you love, and subscribe to our channel so you can listen to more meaningful stories every day. We want to know how you feel about this story. Have you ever witnessed or lived through moments where love helped you get through something you thought was impossible? Share your feelings in the comments below. We truly want to hear the stories that live deep in your heart. Thank you for staying until the very end. Wishing you and your family good health, a joyful life, peace, and happiness every single day. See you in the next video.